Hello everyone, and welcome. We all have to deal with conflict, right? Whether it's at work, at home, or even just what we see happening in the world. But today, we're not just going to talk about how to fix it. We're going to dive deeper and really understand it from the ground up. And it all starts with one simple but incredibly powerful rule.
And here it is. This is the single most important thing to remember. Analysis absolutely has to come before a solution. You know how it is. When there's tension, we just want it to end, so we rush to find a quick fix. But trying to solve a problem without first understanding its root cause, that almost always leads to outcomes that are, well, incomplete and superficial. You have to diagnose the problem before you can treat it.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll really hammer home why that analysis part is so critical. Then we'll get into the good stuff, the four main sources of any conflict. After that, I'll show you a really powerful technique to figure out what's actually going on beneath the surface. And finally, we'll see how this whole framework gives you a new lens to view the world.
Look, it's just human nature to want to get away from the tension of a disagreement. It's uncomfortable. But rushing for a solution without really knowing what's wrong, that's kind of like slapping a Band-Aid on a wound that actually needs stitches. Sure, it might cover up the problem for a little while, but it's not going to truly heal it.
So, to make that diagnosis, we need a framework. And luckily, there's a great one. It turns out you can break down pretty much any conflict into one of four main categories. And this structure is amazing because it helps you cut through all the noise and pinpoint what you're really dealing with.
So here they are. This framework makes things so much easier to understand. Conflicts can be data-driven, value-driven, interest-driven, or need-driven. And what's key here is that each one has a totally different cause and needs a totally different approach. So let's break them down one by one.
Okay, first up, let's talk about data-driven conflicts. This is when the problem really comes down to information. Maybe people have different info, or maybe there's just way too much of it. It could be a simple miscommunication, right? Or a language barrier, or even some super technical data that's just hard for anyone to wrap their head around. But here's the good news. These are usually the easiest ones to spot and solve. Just get everyone on the same page with clear info and you're good to go.
Next up, we've got value-driven conflicts. And these are a little bit trickier. They stem from those really deep-seated differences in our core beliefs, things like our ethics, our culture, our entire worldview. And because our values are so central to who we are, they're pretty fixed, right? Trying to argue directly about them, well, it almost never gets you anywhere.
So what's the move here? What do? The key is to shift the conversation. Instead of getting bogged down arguing about whose values are right, which is a total dead end, you deliberately move the discussion to more solid ground. Let's talk about the data. Let's talk about the interests or the needs that are actually involved in this specific situation. Moving on to our third category, interest-driven conflicts. This is probably the one we're most familiar with. It's all about competition over resources, and that can be something tangible, material stuff like fighting over property or negotiating a salary. But it can also be about things you can't touch, immaterial things, like a desire for status or prestige, or just getting some personal recognition for your work.
And that brings us to the final and deepest level, need-driven conflicts. These pop up when our fundamental personal or psychological needs, think safety, belonging, autonomy, just aren't being met. The tricky part is that they're often all tangled up with interests, which can make it super challenging to tell them apart. But I'll tell you what, uncovering these needs, that is the absolute key to finding a real, lasting resolution.
Okay, so how on earth do we get to those hidden needs? Because people usually don't just come out and say what they really want, right? Sometimes they don't even know how to put it into words. Or they get so dug in on their specific demands that the real reason they're fighting for it gets completely buried.
Well, this is where a really fantastic tool comes in. It's called the onion analysis. Just picture it. A conflict is like an onion. The outer layer, that's the positions. The loud demands, the stuff people say they want. But when you peel that back, you find the next layer, the interests. This is what they're actually trying to achieve. And then when you get to the very core of the onion, that's where you find the needs. These are the fundamental drivers behind the whole thing.
So how do you actually use this? It's pretty straightforward, really. 3 steps. First, just brainstorm. What are all the possible interests and needs for everyone in this situation? Second, and this is a big one, take it a step further and try to actively predict what the other person's needs and interests are. This is huge for building empathy. And finally, you consciously use that onion analysis idea to peel back those layers. That's what sets the stage for a real, honest conversation.
Okay, let's zoom out for a second, because this isn't just a tool for an argument with a coworker. This entire framework,
You can apply it to almost any conflict you see out in the world, all the way up to the major societal debates you see on the news. What this framework really gives you is a new lens. It's like putting on a new pair of glasses. Once you start looking at disagreements this way, you start to see them differently. You can break them down, see all the component parts, and finally understand what's really driving the behavior you're seeing on the surface.
And when you look through that lens, it reveals something really powerful. You'll start to notice that a lot of the big, messy societal conflicts we see, the ones that are always framed as a clash of values, are often, at their core, actually about competing interests and unmet needs.
So, I want to leave you with a question to chew on. Think about a recent disagreement you had. Could be big, could be small, it doesn't matter. But looking back on it now, through this new lens, can you identify the real source? Was it really about what you thought it was about? Or was it actually being driven by something deeper? Was it about data, values, interests, or needs?
This whole powerful framework, by the way, comes from the work of Conflictus, a consultancy that specializes in conflict resolution. And really, understanding these sources is that first, absolutely critical step toward finding a real, lasting solution. Thanks so much for joining us.